all of us who joined online for the launch of our European Marine Board flagship publication, Navigating the Future 6. So my name is Fiona Grant and I'm the chair of the European Marine Board. Our appreciation goes to all of you joining the event, in particular those that have taken time out of their busy schedules to be with us here today, and to all of our distinguished guests. So Navigating the Future 6 is being launched today, and hard copies have been made available to those of you who are here in person. You can also see the QR code on the slide with the link provided to download copies. We very much encourage you to do so. So the venue chosen today for our launch is very appropriate, we think. The Talk CEC is an independent space dedicated to cultural and artistic experiences. And that is something the European Marine Board has been supporting with our Embracing the Ocean programme. It's a very beautiful venue, as I think you'll all agree, and it brings together a laboratory for ideas and experimentation, bringing art, science, history, and contemporary issues together. So we respectfully ask those of you that are here in person not to take and share images of the art without crediting the artists, and information on those artists is available on placards in each space. So really, without further ado, I'd like to kick off proceedings. The working group chair and our esteemed former chair of the European Marine Board, Gilles Lericolais, together with Director Sheila Heymans, will present the document and the recommendations therein. And then we'll take some questions from the audience before moving to responses from some of our key stakeholders and collaborators who are here today. So we have Delilah Al Khudhairy, Director of Maritime Policy and Blue Economy in DG MARE. We have Rolf-Jan Hoeve, Head of Sector of Emissions and Partnerships, Ocean and Waters in DG RTD. And of course, someone who's very familiar to us all in the Marine Board, that is Niall McDonough, who is the chair of JPI Oceans. And so just before I pass the floor to my excellent colleague, Gilles Lericolais, I just want to express my particular thanks to all of the working group experts from around Europe who worked on chapters of the publication. A foresight exercise like this is not easy, but it was very much approached in a proactive, constructive, and with a consensus-driven manner. And I think that is very much reflected in the final recommendations and text. It's also fair to say that a substantial amount of support is always needed from Sheila and the Secretariat team to really take the main findings, each element, integrate the comments from reviewers, and to pull them together into the polished, accessible, and well-structured document that we're launching here today. So my sincere thanks to everybody who contributed to this. So in the introduction of the document, it also states that in the last Navigating the Future 5, it advocated for breaking down traditional silos and working in a transdisciplinary manner. And I know that in the design of Navigating the Future 6, our executive director really sought to include and reflect new voices and experts at European level, gender balance, different disciplines, and inclusion of the EMB youth ambassadors. And I think that approach has been really welcome, and the report is all the better for that. And so really, I just want to move now to introduce our first speaker, former EMB Chair of Navigating the Future 6 Working Group, Sheila Heymans. Thank you, Sheila.
Can I just say that you guys at the back here not very well.
And now? Okay, I'm going to try to do the mic. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Fiona, for introducing this. And I'm very happy to be here to present this new document, Navigating the Future, the number 6, which is something which is important. But first of all, I think it's important to recall to the people who do not know what is the European Marine Board. I think there's nobody, not so much of the people who don't know, but you will discover again what it is. In fact, it's a very important think tank and a big partnership of major research institutes, research also funding agency, and national networks of universities. We have some representative of each of our members here today. We have 38 members, which is quite a good numbers of 19 countries. And I think this is very important when you consider in Europe how many countries have access to IT. So having 19 countries talking and providing some information of research is important. What I have to say, being the former chair of the European Mine Board, and I can tell you, Fiona, it will be very easy with such a secretariat. So the secretariat, as you can see, has 7 members, and they do a very great job. They are very active, and when I was elected the chair of the European Mine Board, I was a little bit afraid and say, what I'm going to do, me, who are a lazy man, and in fact, I was seconded by a very good secretary. So you have the name on the screen, and the director, the executive director is Sheila Heymans. You will hear her talking about the Navigating the Future soon after me. And you heard already the new chair, Fiona Grant, and as you can recognize, we don't have the same English accent, so I'm not so good in English as Fiona, but you would say it's Irish. But I would love to speak as good English as we do. Okay, what we do is we try, as you say, to bridge a gap between the science and policy, which is something important. So today I'm working as a sort of advisor at the General Secretary of the Prime Minister of France. And I can tell you it's very, very difficult to make the policy makers to understand what are the future and the big perspectives. What they want to know is, during their mandate, 4 years, 5 years, or even 3 years, what they can do and what is important. If we take the example of the climate change, I'm a paleo-environmentalist, marine geologist at Skill. I was telling to my children when I was a young boy that you will see the impact of the climate. You will discover that when the insurance company will have to pay a lot of money. And now, this is the case, and we talk about a lot about climate change. Money is one of them. But what we do at the European Mine Board, and we try to bring this information. We have a self-sustained body. We have been created in 1995 during the European Science Foundation. And at the end of the European Science Foundation, we became independent, ESBL or EZW in Dutch, which is an association. This was in 2017. So what we do, we transfer knowledge to the core of marine research policy. To do that, we provide advices. We also we try to impact the policymakers, we try to impact also at national bodies and international also. We have any some connections with our equivalents in US or Canada, or even during this European project like the Alliance we try to have in the Atlantic, in the Mediterranean Sea, and we bring the impact with that and target some important bodies like the European Commission. I hope you are well impacted, or the Parliament. I don't know if Pierre has been impacted by our document. Pierre Karlinski is there, the former member of the Parliament, and also the general public and the science community. So, Navigating the Future, the document you have in hand, is one of our main important documents. We are already providing the number 6. And I would like to recall what was the impact of the former one. So, if you remember, in 2001, already more than 20 years, we provide the first Navigating the Future and that was willing to have going to create a marine European research area. And this was probably the setup of Marine Era and CISERA, for the people who know that. It'd be one of probably the important results. After, if we go to the Navigating the Future, the second, we try to integrate marine science in Europe. And one of the main results, as far as I remember, so this one was 2 years after the first one, was the creation of the inter-oceanographic governance, inter-governmental oceanographic governance. And we have been at the Marine Board working on that and managing what was of this importance. If we go for the number 3, the idea was to update the synthesis of perspective on marine science and technology in Europe. And the results was we had future challenge, especially to try to find solution on climate change and ecosystem-based approach. So that was one of the results. Then came Navigating the Future 4. I think that was a very important also document in 2013, and it was taken, you know, that was really for me the birth of the understanding where we have the feeling we had impacted more people than we were expecting. And that was one we were especially going, for grand challenges, cross-cutting enablers. And that was the creation of the European Blue Forum, the idea of having the oceans. And it was 2 years before the COP21. And I always say that the people who knows me, they have always heard that what I've said about the Paris Agreement. And when I went to in 2015 at the Paris for the climate, I discovered that most of the French policymakers were not aware that the ocean, 71% of the surface of the Earth, had an impact or was playing a role on the climate. I was so surprised, and it's at that time in 2015 that they decided to have something dedicated to the ocean. And that's the blue start to appear in the politic vision. Then we had Navigating the Future 5, and this one is the last one, so it's the one you know probably better. So it's a science for a sustainable future. It's more a prospective vision, a foresight vision. If perspective is more in French. So I'm not going to read all the things, but the relevance of the ocean, the 4D, already we were talking about the 4D, the impact of time, how the time is playing a role. So as a marine geologist, I always say if you want to understand the future, you have to better know the past, how the past was. You have sustainable science and the novel technology, data and modeling. And you know, now we are talking so much about this digital twin of the ocean, and it's in the mission, it's one of the important outtake of the missions. This is something which is in the decade, which is one of the important role, and we have to work a lot to reach the digital twin of the ocean. So let's go to why you are here, Navigating the Future 6. Before I leave the floor to Sheila, who will talk about the insight of that. So we decided to have a vision of to see how the ocean take a role in the wider Earth system, how it can be seen. So we came to the fact with the working groups, and I will come back to that. So I'm talking, and my name is as chair, but the work has been done by the real scientists who were in the working group, all members of our organization. I will come back to that. This is very important. This is not one guy who worked on that. There were a lot of working group and discussion. And they came to the idea to have ocean and people, the work of ocean and climate. As I say, it was very important. And for politics, it's important. The role of ocean and freshwater. And you can see how it's important now for the understanding of the role of the freshwater. The biodiversity, there is the COP at that time on the biodiversity. So this is important. And the biodiversity in the ocean, this is probably the most important part. And we have seen the biodiversity more on the surface of Earth until now than in the ocean. And we try to provide with this document policy and management, research and monitoring recommendations. And this has been done per shop there, but Sheila will come later on. And I like every time you have one of these slides, you have a connection to the area on the internet where you will find the document. But they don't want you to use the Wi-Fi for the moment. So wait for a little of time because they're on Zoom. But you will have access, you can have access, but you can also export it to the Secretariat. So we started in 2022 with the working group. As I said, there were one representative of each organization. We try to include all the career levels, and especially the early career oceanographic peoples, young generation. And I think this is also was one idea coming from the European Mind Board, was being taken by a lot of people like the UN, and they have been asking us how we managed to work with this young generation. And I can tell you they were very active, and they were sometimes very pushing you to your limit, you know, like Juliette, I'm still in contact with her. She's always, you know, pushing you to the reserve. So you have here the chair. I have the chance to have this role, and Sheila did a lot of works, but I would like to, I won't name them, but I would like you to take the names of the contributing authors. That are the real workers, and we have some of them in the assistance, and I will be very pleased to answer questions after if needed. So please don't throw your documents away. Keep it with you. I think you will find an important answer of some of the questions. And if you don't want to carry papers, leave there to the Secretariat. They will use it for papers, and you can download the document afterwards on the internet. Then I will leave the floor to the best executive director I ever met, Sheila Heymans, who will present the inside of the Navigating the Future 6. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to stand as close as I can because I think the people online can't hear very well, but I'm also loud, so that will probably help. Thank you all for being here. And as Gilles said, you know, the two of us kind of pulled the thing together to some extent, but actually the people who really did the work are the people whose names are on the previous slide. And I would urge you to look in the document to find out who these people are and from which institutes, because actually they are the ones who wrote the important information that's in here. Okay, so as Gilles said, there's 4 substantive chapters to the document, and I'm just going to give you a flavor for the different chapters. I'm not going to go into too much detail because there is a lot of information here, and it's definitely worth having a look at the details there. I'll start with the Ocean and People chapter. It is really about how the ocean is situated in our psyche and how important it is for people to know that the ocean is important for them. So it really explores the dynamic relationship between humans and the ocean. It looks at the collaboration that we need, the multi, intra, cross, and transdisciplinary work that's actually needed to really do ocean science properly. It also looks at the importance of the blue economy and how it contributes to people, but also highlights that we need to understand the governance of these maritime activities and how that interacts with the ocean. Looking at the social ecological transformation and transformative adaptation that is actually going to be needed in the future. It also highlights some tools and enablers that there are to make sure that we get this done properly and make some recommendations. So for this talk, I thought I would just go through a few of these and just give you a flavor of some of them. Obviously, the blue economy is really important. It includes things like fisheries and aquaculture, for which we know quite a bit, but it also includes the new upcoming things like clean energy and coastal tourism, for which we actually don't have a lot of information, and we don't always know how humans interact with the ocean and how coastal tourism really helps with that. When it comes to the governance of maritime activities, there's talk in there in the document about the common pool resources and how we actually manage this. This is something from a fisheries context that people know very well, but actually we need to look at the broader aspects with all of the blue economy and how we look at the whole of the ocean as a common pool resource. And we also need to think about equity, justice, and power, which is something that from a research point of view, from a science point of view, I think we haven't really looked at very much. So this is something that's covered in the document. Some of the tools that are there that actually enables us to make these connections include citizen science. Obviously, that is the research that's conducted with the help of the general public. This is something that the Marine Board had worked on. I think the document on advancing citizen science came out in 2016 or 17 already, so we've been working on it for a long time. But it hasn't gotten less important, it's gotten more important. So there's still a lot of citizen science projects out there, and that really helps people to understand the ocean and also actually provides data. So this is actually another enabler. Some of the recommendations that came out of the chapter is that we really need to understand these ocean narratives and views. We need to understand not just science view, but actually all of the different views around the ocean. And we need to be able to integrate the cross and inter and transdisciplinary work that we're doing. We have to understand how the blue economy will evolve. This is something that is constantly being reinvented, but that has implications for how the impact that it has on the ocean. And we have to know then how these human activities actually interact with ecosystem-based management of the ocean, and how we're going to be able to adapt and mitigate for climate change in the future with these new interactions, these new human activities. There's also, multiple marine societal goals that we need to understand and how it will impact communities. And then we need to explore more transparent, just, equitable, and sustainable approaches to governance, which is something that is also something new that's come out. Certainly in Navigate the Future 4, we had a chapter on sustainability science, which start, but here we've gone into a lot more detail on the social side of things, which will be very new to some of our natural science colleagues. And then we need to explore diverse public-based data collection. And you'll see that data collection comes through in all of these. Ocean observations is still very important. When we get to the ocean and climate chapter, it highlights that the ocean is part of the climate system, and that is, but it's a climate change mitigator, and it's one of the major drivers of climate. The ocean is impacted by climate change, but obviously it's also a tool for how we can mitigate against climate change, and it also makes some recommendations. So just to highlight, obviously, and probably the people online in the room know all of these things, but to highlight it again, the ocean has taken up, I think it says 89% here of all of the heat that we produce. It is actually very important in the climate story and climate narrative, so we cannot forget it. And as Gilles said, the IPCC has understood that, but I think the wider public also needs to know this. But the ocean is also impacted by climate change. Obviously, climate change it manifests itself into marine heat waves, which causes animals to die and wash up. It also causes sea level rise, which is maybe one of the obvious things, but there's also impacts on ocean oxygen, ocean acidification. All of these things actually is one of the things that are some of the things that how the ocean is going to change due to climate change. However, the ocean can also help us to mitigate against these. And so nature-based solutions is something that came out of our coastal resilience document that came out last year. And obviously, this is going to be a huge important part of how we actually deal with climate change into the future. So some of the recommendations that came out of these are very specific. We're really going to have to read the document to understand them all, but we really need to understand the changes that there are in the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets, so that we can actually understand how severe they're going to be and what the implications of those are going to be, the potential issues that might come from them. We need to understand how local scale processes affect large scale ocean circulation. That's another thing that has come out of the document. There are things like mapping natural CO2 and methane reservoirs and actually understanding what will happen when these are released, which will inevitably happen under climate change. And we need to have scientific indicators for social adaptation and for tipping points. Also something that's come out. There's this very specific recommendation that there are, from the IPCC, have identified topics that are actually low confidence in their assessment. So there's low-hanging fruit of things that actually, from a marine science perspective, we really need to figure out. And then we need long-term monitoring of essential climate and essential ocean variables. And then, of course, ocean-based climate solutions needs to be researched and regulated properly. So those are some of the recommendations. And of course, I'm not telling you how they got to those recommendations. That's why you have to read the document. I see Niall looking very comfortable. All right, so on ocean and fresh water, it talks a lot about the interactions between the ocean and groundwater, the impact that human activities have on the freshwater fluxes into the ocean, the cumulative impacts and multiple stressors that come from that, and again, make some recommendations. So as a reminder, and this is actually something that very few people think about in much detail, but actually freshwater is a very, very small part of the amount of the water that we have on the earth. 97% of the 1.5% of the water on the earth is salt water. So basically, we don't have a lot of fresh water. And of the fresh water, most of that is actually in the ice sheet. So we really need to be more mindful of how we use the fresh water we have. Of course, the interaction between freshwater and groundwater is something that, from a marine perspective, we hardly ever think about. Actually, I don't think we've thought about it very much at all. But there is a dynamic equilibrium between freshwater and groundwater in that the freshwater, the seawater actually and the groundwater interacts with each other, and there's a natural interaction between these. You have freshwater running down from the earth into the ocean, and there's some stratification happening there. So in a natural situation, there's always a little bit of give or take between the groundwater and the sea. But of course, in the last 100 or more than 100 years, we have extracted a lot of freshwater, and that freshwater extraction actually has changed the interactions between the groundwater and the sea. And so now you have, when you extract so much freshwater, you have a lot of that seawater actually infiltrating, and then this causes problems between salinification of groundwater, and this is going to have large implications for growing crops and all sorts of other things. So this is something that really was highlighted. It has implications for how we're going to be working with the sea. In addition, we now have lots of floods, we have lots of fresh water running off, and that also has an impact. So that is another thing that is worth keeping in mind. On the other side of the coin, obviously, fresh water runs off into the sea, and as I mentioned, with lots of flooding, you have a lot of fresh water running much faster into the sea. That is going to cause a lot of runoff and a lot of nutrients and a lot of pollution going down into the sea. So here we have some of the stressors, single stressors that we might consider that comes from the sea. PFAS, which is a chemical that's actually produced and in plastic and all sorts of things. It goes into the groundwater, it goes down the rivers, it comes into the sea. It actually causes impact on animals. But we also have nutrients. This is a picture of phytoplankton bloom on a canal in Flanders, which basically shows you that you have a lot of nutrients running down. It goes into the canals, eventually it gets into the sea. Again, this causes changes into the ecosystem. And then we have plastic pollution, something that we know a lot about already. But if you put all of these things together, the cumulative impacts is something we don't understand. So some of the recommendations that come from there is that we really need to monitor better. We need monitoring approaches that can study the impact of saltwater intrusion into coastal freshwater. This is something that I think we will have to look at. We need to understand the impact of releasing matter, contaminants, pathogens, and gases, and how that under climate change will actually have an impact on the ocean, but also on the wider system. Also, there's quite a bit of talk about frozen pandemics, and I'm not going to tell you what those are. You're going to have to read about it. But this is something that is definitely worth thinking about. As climate change happens, you have lots of things defrosting, and who knows what's coming out of those. We need to develop adaptive pollutant policies. We need to understand how we're going to deal with these emergent substances that we are only now finding out about. Also, we need to think about how we can reuse some of these substances. I think nutrient recycling is something that has happened a lot. We can actually find ways of doing that better. And we need to explore poorly understood pathways for pollutants and pathogens. So that's something more to read about on freshwater. Then the final chapter is on biodiversity. It talks about what biodiversity is, why it's important, because it's important for ecosystem functioning and ecosystem services. So it talks about that. It looks at the activities and stresses that affects ocean biodiversity, talks about biological invasions, not innovations, invasions, and how that is an increasing concern. How also under climate change, you're going to have changes in species distribution, and looking at how you can conserve and restore biodiversity, and knowledge that we need to fill gaps and recommendations again. So a reminder for those of you who are maybe geologists in the room, like Gilles, why do we need biodiversity? Biodiversity is very important because it actually provides the functions that we need, and the functions that we need are very important to the services that we depend on. And the services that we depend on here are things like food provisioning, it's things like climate change adaptation, it's things like habitats, things like recreational activities and other activities. So there are a lot of ecosystems function that the ecosystem services that the ocean provide that is important that we get through the functions in the ecosystem, which is underpinned by biodiversity. So this is actually very important. On biological invasions, it shows the impact of species invasions into Europe. You can see in this graphic how invasive species have actually been accumulating in Europe over time. You can see that the Mediterranean is obviously a hotspot for invasive species, both in the plants and in the invertebrates, but also in the fish species. So invasive species is a very big problem. It causes big problems on the function and ecosystem services that we are used to from the ocean. So this is linked very much to the previous slide. Then finally, some of the recommendations from this chapter is that we really need to understand how marine species adapt to climate change, what impact human activities have on biodiversity, and also the impact of invasive species. Again, we need to map pathogenic microorganisms. Something that also has come out is a lot of talk about the small things. We talk about biodiversity, we think about big animals, but actually it's also the diversity of microorganisms that's important. But we also need to know the pathogenic microorganisms that are out there. And we need to explore how climate change drives species movements and what that will imply for governance issues. It certainly will have an implication for fisheries in the future, something to think about. Then we also need to study success factors to improve conservation and restoration, something that is probably not new. We need to look at traditional taxonomic and new genomic methods and try and figure out how we can work with these together. And we really need to train new taxonomists, because that is something that isn't going to go away, and we definitely will need taxonomic expertise in order to do this properly. Finally, we have a closing chapter, which is has some main messages, mainly that as a marine science community, we need to figure out how to operate more sustainably and more equitably. We need, again, sustained ocean observations. This is, again, not new. And we need open, fair, and digitized data. We need sustained and long-term research funding, sustainable ocean finance and investment, not necessarily the same thing as research funding. We need to understand the impact of multiple stressors, and we need to train the people that will be able to work in this interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary space. It's not easy. It's definitely much harder to work at that between the different spheres. So we definitely need good training for that. And we need to harmonize the interfaces and standards and policies and monitoring strategies. I think the Ocean Pact that we've just heard about is probably going to be a very good way to do that. And we need to balance the need for monitoring parameters against resources and technology. And one of the other things that I think came out from the Vigo conference is that we want to make sure that politicians actually listen to us. They don't just talk to us. Let's say recommendations for the politicians who are not in the room, obviously. But when you see one, please ask them to also listen. I think that's something that is near to my heart. So those are some of the main messages that come out of the document. And to start now, I think we will have a question and answer session. There are some of the authors in the audience, so if there's some questions, I might ask them. But I'm happy to take questions if anybody has any burning questions right now. If there's online, I don't know if they need to. Yeah, you need to type it into the Q&A, and Achel will speak the question for you. Don't know if anybody has any questions. If not, I mean, I'm happy to take. We can have questions afterwards in the room anyway, because we will be having drinks afterwards. So then, happy to talk more. If there's yes, I think we need a. There we go. Maybe you're going to have to stand up. There we go. Thanks. Can we? Yeah, there we go. Perfect. Yeah.
As you say, I'm here to talk, to listen to the we have geographical approach to the recommendations. Essentially, at the end of the presentation, that is going to chart with Mediterranean Baltic and I'm not chair of the issues committee with the situations are very different from the one that we're facing. So is this something of which you consider on quality? I see that this is not the case now.
Yeah. I think it's very relevant. I think for sure there is different issues in different sea basins. That is for sure the case. And I think that, for instance, as I mentioned, the Mediterranean has a huge impact with invasive species. That's something that obviously is pointed out. But in the document itself, we don't specify things by region, except if they are regionally specific. But it is indeed definitely something that's worth thinking about. And yes, indeed. Any others? Nothing online? Or maybe we'll go and we can take extra comments later. So we're going to, you'll see that we have responses from our stakeholders here. We have 3 responses. These people were lucky enough to get the document before you, so they have had time to actually read it, which makes it easier to have an opinion, I think. So I will call to the floor Delilah Al Khudhairy. I'm sorry, I'm sure I made a mistake on your name, who is the Director of Maritime Policy and Blue Economy at DGMARE. So Delilah.
Hopefully you can hear me.
I mean, you can always take it if you want to. It might be, no. Yeah, so that's good.
Well, first of all, good afternoon. Thank you, Sheila. Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, Gilles, also for inviting us to be part of this response. I'm really very happy to be here and to have had the privilege to also read the report in advance, which is absolutely, it is a fascinating read, and I highly recommend to take the time to do that. I'd like to begin with acknowledging, actually, how your report has been helping basically, and the series of reports, not just the latest one, but the whole series of them, we find that they have been really been helping to shape a robust agenda for the marine environment, and as you mentioned, to build that bridge between science and policy, providing that interface extremely important. And as you also hinted, Sheila, directly, indirectly, you need knowledge for ocean policy, and this means, you know, we really need a deep understanding of how, as you mentioned, and Gilles mentioned, it is still unbelievable to think today that there is not a sufficient understanding of the importance of the ocean contribution in the context of the global Earth system. And it's something that we still have to work on through our ocean literacy and through raising awareness. And I don't mean just mention it by words, I mean really in terms of, you know, sort of like the detailed relationship and what it means, especially if we go deeper into the ocean and not stay at the surface. So we have a lot of work still to do ahead of us. And we need that deep understanding, because if we want to design policy that is comprehensive, then we need to understand the role of the oceans so that we can integrate it better in our sustainable development policies. And so I've actually found, because receiving your report in advance, I started looking at the previous series to sort of see, you know, like, and what was, and how did that, you know, build upon. And, you know, since the inception in 2001, I would say, and looking in hindsight, what has come about after that, I would say it has been, your reports, your series of reports have been actually quite remarkable in terms of anticipation and also foresight, because many things, so you have been listened to because several things have happened since your reports have come about. So there is definitely a listening audience there. And what particularly I found quite important is the vision that in the way you have approached shaping the marine research area, and how you have impacted also and finding itself also in our European research, but also I'm sure in the national research as well. I find the way you have identified those challenges and opportunities really spot on, but very importantly, we spoke about that at the Maritime Spatial Planning celebration yesterday, the collaboration. Absolutely essential, the consistent collaboration between all the types of stakeholders, whether it's scientists, the policymakers, the member states, the authorities, the experts, very important. Now, coming to the latest report, Navigating the Future, we have found it that it's very, or I have found it that it's very pertinent in terms of the priorities that you have shown us by chapter, or, you know, sort of like the beacon on what we should focus on, also particularly from a policy point of view, but very importantly, also linking between the marine environment and society. Very important. That will actually become more important as we go ahead, and especially with our ocean pact in the future. What I found also very interesting is also the link between the different blue economy sectors. So not only focusing on the traditional that we're familiar with, but also emerging ones. There are other emerging sectors that could have also been integrated, but I think I would say maybe that's for a future report to reflect upon. But at the same time, you know, balancing, you know, having a competitive blue economy and a resilient one and so on, it is very important also to take into consideration, you know, the climate change context, but at the same time also addressing the needs from the point of view of protection, restoration, and so on. So this is the kind of holistic approach that we think is relevant towards, that we need to take into consideration, and relevant in terms of any discussion that we have on the ocean. I think it's very important to also recognize the contribution you're also making towards the Mission Ocean. I think it is pertinent and continues to be, but also the UN Ocean Decade. And it's very important bringing together all these global forces, because we need to imagine and we need to design what is the global impact we want to accomplish. And we need to be driving towards that. And these wider collaborations at different sectors and so on are absolutely key to make sure that, we are going in that direction, and you are helping towards driving that direction, and that's very, very important. Of the topics that we particularly mentioned, and you highlighted some of them, and some of them are persistent, that are relevant to what we're doing at the moment, but also future priorities, that is the importance of the ocean observation. I will underline that because we still have work to do when we're talking about standardized, harmonized, but very importantly, sharing data. Yesterday at the conference, we spoke about data does not exist if it's not shared. It absolutely has to be shared. So that's something quite important. And the blue economy and healthy and resilient oceans, you need data so that you have knowledge. So for us, we fully agree, having a robust understanding of the marine world is rooted in observation, data, and the knowledge applications that depend on those observation and data. And we refer to this as marine knowledge. And we think that it's important from the point of view as underpinning the blue economy, which, as you also highlight in the report, which is in line with the way we actually approach that too, that the blue economy is not just relying on turnover and employment and things like that. It is also very important that it's balanced with taking care of the ocean health, taking care of its productivity, but also the well-being. So that means taking into account the social dimension as well. So the environmental, the economic, and the social aspect of sustainability. Now, over the years, we have made some notable investments and progress, and Rolf is also going to mention a few examples, but I would like to talk about some, that we're more directly involved in, and these are related to these open access data type of infrastructure, ocean services that are providing high quality ocean observation data, and forecast both at a European level and a global level that are very important for feeding that knowledge that we need for understanding our ocean. And here I'm referring to the Copernicus Marine Service, but also the EMODnet that you have just mentioned. They're very good as they are, but we still need better data. We still need better forecasts. We need better global predictions. We also need to have comprehensive digital connected representation of our ocean. The ocean is a connected system, which means that you need data that is interconnected, and you need systems that can model or understand them. They also need to be connected. The boundaries have to disappear basically in that context. And so that's very important. And so supporting the global ocean observing system for us is essential. It does help to also foster the collaborations that I was talking about. And in that context that I just mentioned, we really need data that is interoperable. It has to be, we need the common standards that you mentioned, and we need to ensure that any methodologies, best practices, and so on, that they're shared also across our member states. And so we are, sort of like pushing for having more coordinated monitoring efforts that we can reduce, we can optimize the efforts, but also reduce duplication. And in this context, we are actually, in the context of the Ocean Observation Network, we have initiated to work and collaborate more closely with the member states. There is strong interest in this shared work towards having a common approach towards ocean observation in Europe. And I can report also that there is steady progress towards that. So we need to watch the space also as we go forward. Now, another area where European marine knowledge also needs further consolidation is the digital twin ocean. This does build upon the Copernicus Marine Services. It does build upon the EMODnet, but it needs a lot more in order to live up to the expectations that it has in terms of helping to deliver. It also opens new opportunities as well in terms of managing the ocean relying on the best available science and knowledge and data. And in that context, the digital twin ocean also make a real impact towards maritime spatial planning. We hope that will help us to better organize the maritime space in a way that actually respects the environment, the economics of also our coastal communities, but at the same time boost the sustainable and competitive and also development of our blue economy sectors. So this is a viewpoint that it's quite important for us to see how we can explore also using the digital ocean in that regard. Another key point that we have in common is that for an efficient coastal and marine management, you mentioned that we do need to have equitable participation across the different communities and to incorporate this shared value and knowledge. We think that's very important. And if you look at the mission letter to our Commissioner Designate, it specifically calls for a more participatory approach towards ocean-related policies and stresses the need to involve all the stakeholders through dedicated dialogues. Of course, we're going to seize the opportunity as soon as we're able to start with a new commission. And we do have various events that are lined up that will engage all the stakeholders, including the fishers and the blue economy and marine sectors and the science also. So we have the European Ocean Days that are coming up. We have the European Maritime Days, which take place in the first half of next year. We also have UN Ocean Conference, but we also have the Digital Ocean Forum that's also coming up. These really kind of like instill and show how we really do believe in this collaborative open approach. Now, I mentioned the Commissioner Designate and some of the tasks that he has set out for him. As you know, the Commission is preparing the European Ocean Pact that has been mandated to the Commissioner responsible for fisheries and ocean. And this pact aims to be a reference that will ensure coherence for all ocean-related policies. And it also, in that scope, it also aims to engage communities, especially also the coastal communities, through the fisheries and ocean dialogue. And the Ocean Pact will actually focus on resilient and healthy oceans, promoting a sustainable and a competitive, resilient economy, but also importantly underpinning that with consolidating and extending the European Marine Knowledge Framework. So in a nutshell, basically, the Ocean Pact will provide a strategic framework for a holistic approach towards ensuring this coherence between and for all the ocean-related policy. And very importantly, having this engagement with all the relevant stakeholders. So in a way, it talks to some of those recommendations that you had mentioned in the latest report. And we can't, rely just on science in the context of the priorities that we have for the ocean. We do need, as you said, us policymakers, we do need to listen to the research community. So these opportunities that we have, the collaboration and the engagement we've had also with the marine body over the many, many years has been quite important. And if you see what has happened and arisen, you will see that we have been listening because several of the things do exist today and maybe are just starting, but that's very important. So you do know that we do have a listening here, and we do welcome this exchange with the research community. And you also note in the mission letter designated to our, or our task to our Commissioner Designate, there is an important part also on developing an R&I strategy together also with knowledge, innovation and investment in order to underpin the Ocean Pact. So there's an important role from many of the recommendations that you mentioned today to also find themselves in there. So I invite all here to join us also at the European Ocean Days, to join us also at the Maritime Days. We are working, as I said, on the Ocean Dialogue. You will find that, these opportunities will arise and this will be an important part for you to contribute towards also shaping the Ocean Pact. It will be very important listening as well. And I'd like to thank you once again for involving us. We look forward to the continued collaboration. It's excellent so far, and thank you. Continue with your reports. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for that. Okay, so I'm not sure if it'll take, well, maybe we can have that conversation later if people want to come back, but maybe we'll go straight on to Rolf-Jan Hoeve, who is the head of sector for mission and partnerships in the Oceans, Seas and Waters unit of DGRTD, and he stepped in at the last moment for Elizabeth Balzi, so I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts.
Yes, thank you very much. Just like Delilah said, I'm very happy and honored to be here on the launch of the Navigating the Future report. Delilah mentioned already a bit of the perspective of the European Commission, so I'll try to add a bit on from the side of DGRTD to her analysis. So your report for us is a key reference document. It's already the 6th in the series, and like Delilah said, it hasn't gone unnoticed. And a lot of the recommendations and the issues mentioned in the report are picked up by us, and they provide valuable input for us. They have provided already valuable input when we were drafting the mission Ocean and Waters. And will also when we prepare the other effects. You highlighted the 4 chapters in the report, and I think we can liaise to all of them basically. So the one on climate change, for example, we see the effects of climate change in Europe every day. Europe is the fastest warming continent, and you mentioned the enduring heat waves. Of course, they have an effect on the oceans, but as we've seen this summer, they also fuel extreme weather events. So, which means we have to adapt to both flooding, water scarcity, and not only the amount of water, but also the quality of water. They're basically 2 coins of or 2 sides of the same coin, basically. So not only are oceans part of our climate system, but it's also the quality of the water itself, both salt water and fresh water, that we need to be very careful about. What we also see is that the ocean system, you mentioned it as a regulator and a driver of climate change, but I think we all share the knowledge that we're close to crossing certain thresholds and safe boundaries that we have in many areas, not only planetary boundaries, but also, for example, if you look at ocean acidification, the whole range of acidification, we're basically stretching the absorption capacity so much that the whole capacity of the ocean that it took up so far, like basic harvesting, is not something we can take for granted. Delilah also mentioned that the coming out of this report is actually a good timing in the sense of that we have a new incoming commissioner, and we have mission letters not only to your commissioner, but also to our commissioner, the commission designate, Mrs. Sarajeva, for startups, research and innovation. And her mission letter states, we're quite happy about that Europe needs to be competitive, but also that we need to transition to a clean and digital economy, and very important for us as DGRTD is that puts research and innovation and technology at the center of our economy. That basically there is a lot of expectations on research, and collectively we have to work together to deliver on those. Her mission letter also mentions that she needs to keep implementing Horizon Europe and the new framework program, and to intensify her efforts to make sure that the EU missions, including Oceans and Waters, achieve their 2030 goals. And that is, of course, something that it's also very important. If you look at restoration, the 30% of marine protected areas by 2030, etc. And that's very dear to our heart. Delilah mentioned the R&I strategy underpinning the Oceans Pact, but there's a number of other initiatives that's being announced in political priorities from the Commissioner. Water resilience strategy is being mentioned, a clean and digital pact, or a new industrial accelerator act. So there are many other initiatives where we as Commission and we as Commission services have to keep collaborating and ensuring that all our actions are coherent. So if we are driving a transition to clean hydrogen on the one hand, that it doesn't impact the water efficiency principle first, for example, or many of those other potentially conflicting interests. And I think more and more people will be looking towards research and innovation, science and technology to also help address that. So what is the role of R&I in this? Well, R&I was mentioned by various speakers already, helping us to map and look at what are the impacts on biodiversity conservation. How can we transition to a cleaner industrial or industry? How can we shape our digital transition? You mentioned the digital twin ocean. What we know is that, for example, member states and member state authorities are very much looking towards a tool, and I think that the DTO could be instrumental in that, in their maritime spatial planning. For example, when they're planning marine protected areas, where should they be located? So not to, let's say, the optimization of all those spatial planning decisions in order that they not conflict wind parks or fishery activities or other upcoming activities like renewable energies, etc. Science is also key in predicting what climate change will bring us, and we will need to intensify on that. Sea level rise, how is it going to impact coastal communities? I'm from a country, the Netherlands, which will surely be heavily impacted by that. Saline intrusions, you mentioned a bit, interaction between groundwater and the oceans. It's a big issue in the Netherlands, where basically the freshwater reserves are getting depleted and salt water is moving inland. And last but not least, stop water pollution. You had one slide on PFAS, but I'm thinking on antimicrobial resistance genes, which are spreading everywhere, where we need new techniques to monitor where are they going, how are they impacting also human health. So there are endless examples of that. The Navigating the Future report is not only important to us as the European Commission in terms of us preparing the upcoming strategies and initiatives that were mentioned, but also in continuing our work on Horizon Europe and on the new FP10, the new framework program for research and innovation. And what I liked from your report very much is also the hydrosphere approach, which I think aligns very much with our new knowledge and innovation community that is planned to be set up in the area of water, marine and maritime sectors and ecosystems. The European Institute of Innovation and Technology, EIT, will launch a call for that next year. and that is aimed at deployment, upscaling solutions, commercializing innovative solutions, and basically fueling the blue economy. You mentioned already our upcoming process, but I think also for the FPTM, your report will definitely be helpful in providing input and inspiration for stakeholder consultations that we will have in the context of our co-creation process. Delilah mentioned the UN Decade of Ocean Science and Sustainable Development. I think it's also crucial for that. So the Commission in April this year adopted a joint roadmap with the IOC UNESCO on the cooperation on the Ocean Decade, and this is very much coherent with that. The roadmap recognizes the EU's contribution to the decade, not only through Horizon Europe, but also through the missions and our partnerships that we have in place, like the Sustainable Blue Economy Partnership, the Water for All Partnership. We have AORIA, the Atlantic Ocean Research and Innovation Alliance. So we have many of those examples, and those partnerships and communities will also take inspiration for that. So collectively, we should engage to make sure that we make this upcoming ocean conference in Nice, for example, a big success. And let me conclude by thanking the European Marine Board for all their inputs and the valuable reports, and being such an excellent partner, not only as the EMB itself, but also the individual partners. I looked at the report, and there is a whole range of renowned institutes that work together and channel their collective knowledge into this, and that's very much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And then last but not least, definitely not least, is Niall McDonough, who is the chair of JPI Oceans and from the Marine Institute. And Niall, it'd be nice to hear your opinion.
Thank you very much, Sheila. Sheila said I'm from the Marine Institute, but I'm here today very much representing JPI Oceans, the Joint Programming Initiative on Healthy and Productive Seas and Oceans. And I'll say a little bit more just shortly on JPI Oceans and on the benefits we'll get from this document. But I want to start my remarks this afternoon, first of all, by thanking you and the Marine Board for having me on behalf of JPI Oceans make an intervention here, and also to congratulate you on the publication of what is a really important document. Particular, perhaps just to, at the risk of repeating, to congratulate the chairs, Fiona and Gilles, the Marine Board members, Sheila, you and the team, the Secretariat, and all of the authors of the paper. I have a little bit of experience and background in terms of being involved in these kind of papers with the Marine Board, and I know and understand what goes into creating them, and it is not trivial. It is a huge amount of work to pull together all of the expertise and knowledge from a diverse community of scientists and other stakeholders, and bring that together into a compelling and coherent narrative and publish it in the form of a Navigate Future paper. But what that does is it gives that paper a really powerful platform as the collective voice of the European marine science community. So it's not a paper that's coming out of one organization, let's say, or one consultant's office or one department of etc. It is a paper that is the voice of the community, and that's why colleagues from the Commission and other users and national policymakers around Europe and further afield use this paper, in particular Navigating the Future, but also the other Marine Board papers, as really important science policy. So my congratulations to you on the publication. It's also very timely, and I think this point has been mentioned by both Rolf-Jan and Delilah as well. Obviously, we are at a point now where discussions are well underway for FP10. We see this is a very good time for these kind of papers to be put in front of key stakeholders and to be part of that conversation. Approaching the halfway point at the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development again, you know, I think really the UN colleagues are looking now at how do we go forward into the next part of this decade, and you know, all of these forms of advice are really important and valuable in that regard. And of course, there's a new new commissioners with a new agenda, and again, a very timely paper to feed into that agenda. In particular, the Ocean Pact, which is really interesting, and the next program and the mission as it comes forward. Gilles reflected a little bit in his earlier remarks on the length of time that now that Navigating the Future series have been published. So the first position paper, NF1, published in 2001, 23 years therefore. So, you know, I haven't looked around, but I think from a marine perspective, certainly this is unique. Okay, I don't think there's another series of science policy documents that covers that span of time. And in that regard, it actually acts in and of itself as a time series of science policy priorities. And it's very interesting to look at, Gilles did in his presentation, at how those priorities change. So we see new things absolutely coming on stream. We see those policies being reflected in the broader, let's say, political environment and being driven by other agendas, but we also see the science voice having its own, science community having its own voice. Some things are new, and we see some new perspectives in this paper, and of course, technology evolves, and we're looking at sort of tools and methodologies now that we weren't talking about 20 plus years ago in relation to the use of sort of autonomous vehicles and AI and underwater communications and eDNA and all of these things that we didn't have before. But some messages don't change. And the remaining deficit in terms of our observing systems still exists. Huge progress has been made. Certainly, we have a lot of coordination of the data and downstream data products and services through marine knowledge initiatives like EMODNet, but collecting the data is still, we still have major gaps. We still have temporal, spatial gaps. We have gaps in terms of the types of variables we need to monitor. So some of those messages haven't changed. I had the pleasure to also be at the launch of the previous Navigating the Future paper in Paris, which was 5 years ago, Navigating the Future 5. And boy, when we think of where we were in 2019, did we not know what was coming right down the line at us, you know? A year later, we were in lockdown. Okay, the world was a different place. We had such an impact of the pandemic, but there's other huge changes that are taking place in that period, huge geopolitical developments, the Russian war in Ukraine, we have conflict in the Middle East, we have so many different things that are naturally changing the perspectives and the political priorities of people at all levels of governance. And it's hard sometimes for us as a science policy community to continue to make our voice heard in that environment, because these are really existential and critical issues. Nobody would deny that. And they also impact on the science agenda itself. We see security and strategic autonomy becoming much more important in the conversation towards future research programs, both at European and national levels. What COVID taught us, though, was that, well, I'd say, to risk of massive oversimplification, two very simple things. Firstly, what governments can do in an emergency, right? When you know, complete change, radical measures were taken to deal with COVID, because we saw in front of our eyes what was happening. But also the critical role of science and knowledge and expertise in enabling us to deal with that emergency. Okay. If you look at page 16, and thank you for the advanced copy, I haven't had a chance to read it, which is great. It shows the planetary boundaries. That's something we've all seen before. We're familiar with the planetary boundaries diagrams, but still alarming every time I look at it. And we see 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries currently being assessed are now surpassed. You know, that's the definition of an emergency in my book. Okay, it's not happening in maybe the same immediate timescales as COVID impacted us, but we are in a situation where we have an emergency. We have an emergency in relation to climate, we have an emergency in relation to biodiversity. And that requires more than just the incremental step-by-step, measures that, frankly, we continue to progress. I'll come back to some of that and speak a little bit about the document itself and the really interesting way it's framed. I just do want to take the opportunity to say a little bit about JPI Oceans, of course, and again, the benefits that we will accrue as another platform from navigating the future 6. So JPI Oceans is an intergovernmental platform which is basically designed to increase impact and efficiency of marine research in a European context. So we're not around as long as the Marine Board, which stretches back to the 90s. JPI Oceans was established in 2011, but we do have a different role. The Marine Board and JPI Oceans have different roles, and sometimes it's really important to communicate that. The Marine Board is really in the space of delivering advice and science policy. It's a think tank, it's future oriented, it's doing foresight, it's saying these are the big challenges we need to address. It's not for the Marine Board to go out and then implement those, it's for others to do that. JPI Oceans is one mechanism that is in some ways implementing some of that. So we use and need and value the outputs from the Marine Board position papers and certainly from the Navigating the Future papers. We very much appreciate that we got an even more advanced copy of NF6 before our so JPI Oceans we are currently in the process of developing our new strategy for the next 5 years. And we had there's various stages along the way, but we had a workshop here in Brussels back in June, and it was great to have a copy of NF6 because we were able to kind of frame some of the messaging and some of the discussions with the knowledge of what you were putting in that document and what's coming out from the Marine Board. And that's going to be the case as we move towards actually defining our strategy. We're meeting in Naples next week, actually, to have a further step as a management board of JPI Oceans, and we'll be discussing it there as well. There is a lot of synergy between what we're seeing in JPI Oceans and also some of the topics we're picking up, what we're seeing in NF6, sorry, some of the topics we're picking up in JPI Oceans. Certainly, the focus on freshwater and duck is really interesting. That's kind of, it's not something we've seen in previous Navigating Futures. It does align very well with what the mission is doing in terms of restoring the oceans and waters. But it came home to me when I had the opportunity to chair a session in the Ocean Conference in Vigo, that not so long ago, which was really focused on contaminants of emerging concern, aquatic pollutants. And really the idea of just sort of looking at that from an ocean perspective, ocean science perspective, where we might look at concentrations of various contaminants of emerging concern and what impacts they're having on the environment. That's important, but it's not going to solve the problem. To solve the problem, you need to interact with the source of the problem, which is land-based, which is waste going into freshwater systems, and eventually ending up at sea. So there's an industry component, there's a human behavior component, there's there's a sort of freshwater and transitional water component, etc. All of these aspects need to be stitched together. It's a perfect example how we need to collaborate to really solve problems. And I should say that JPI Oceans has also been sort of collaborative in this space, where we work both with JPI Water and JPI antimicrobial resistance and the Commission to seed and build a co-fund which has since funded 18 projects, actually meeting the final meeting at the moment, today, I think, in Frankfurt. Thanks to Willem de Boer for guiding me on some of the background. He's here today. It's a colleague from Deputy Director of JPI Oceans Secretariat. So Willem advised me that that meeting is taking place today. And again, the interactions between what you're saying and what we're implementing in terms of some of those collaborations is really, really important. Some of the other themes very quickly coming out of JPI Oceans, again, we see very well reflected in NF6. So we have one of the things we're really trying to do at JPI Oceans is we see ourselves as a very agile early mover on topics. We showed this with our microplastics. We're going back 10 years more. That's more or less being included now. We're producing a final document on some of the outputs of 10 projects that were jointly funded by our members through joint actions on microplastics. But when we started that work, it was really early. It was just when microplastics were coming up the agenda and everyone was realizing that this is an issue. JPI Oceans is able to move very quickly in that regard because we just need 3 countries with a willingness to put money on the table. We had many more than 3 in this case, and launch a joint involved. We've had several rounds of joint involved there. But we're also looking at topics now more recently, including marine lightscapes, changing marine lightscapes, which is including issues like the darkening of coastal waters due to runoff and sometimes eutrophication and growth, which is affecting actually the penetration of sunlight and affecting the whole system. But also the artificial light at night issue, which actually is quite an issue in urban environments where you have artificial light impacting on organisms which have very much highly adapted to particular photo periods and light regimes. These are topics that are probably not been on the mainstream, but we're looking at them. And we actually have an action on offshore pressure groundwater as well in scoping at the moment. So a lot of areas of collaboration, 2 different but really important science networks, marine science networks with 2 different roles. It's very important that we work closely together. Just to mention a few more points on the document itself, I mentioned, I think, the approach with the 4 sort of main areas of people, climate, biodiversity, and fresh water is really, really strong. And obviously, that's been well explained by yourself, Sheila, and I won't sort of repeat your document, what's in it, but I'll just pick out maybe some of the things that jumped out of me and some of the reflections from that. So just on the people aspect, so at the privilege last week, 2 weeks ago, of being in Ottawa at the All Atlantic Ocean Research and Innovation Alliance Forum, which is being hosted by Canada. And they have presentations there. There's 2 categories of presentations, which for me really were more impactful than the others. I mean, no disrespect to other presenters in that regard, but the first was there was two presenters from the Inuit community, Indigenous peoples, and they were unbelievable good speakers. I mean, but they were just speaking. They would speak to anyone, like they were just sort of having a conversation with the audience, but giving the perspective of what the ocean is to them and how really they are intrinsically part of their environment. The ocean is intrinsically part of them and vice versa. And they actually see the ocean as a living being in itself. And how they described it was in such simple but articulate terms, was just really mind-blowing. And it speaks to this piece you have in this document about it's so important to take into account traditional, local knowledge and also just perspectives from people who look at the world in a very different way. It doesn't dilute the science; it enriches it actually. So they were really, really inspiring. But the other piece that was inspiring, and I was, I wasn't expecting this so much actually, were the early career ocean professionals. And I know Marine Board has been really strong in this space. We actually have an Irish ECOP working with you, Virginia, and she was there in Ottawa. And but there was a whole group because there's a lot of work in the Atlantic Ocean Research and Innovation Alliance on building a program there of ECOPS. But what really struck me, and I had for the first time at one of these events, the opportunity to actually really engage with them, talk to them from the sidelines, sit down at a table, have a cup of coffee, what struck me from those conversations was I realized that as you go through your career, unwittingly, you're probably building barriers in your own mind. Okay, in terms of, and you like, I would like to think I'm still open-minded, but the reality is, the dynamics develop over time in there. Okay, and when you speak to people who haven't who are yet just looking at everything as just an open question and how can we solve this, it actually teaches you to break down those barriers, how closed and narrow-minded you can perceive certain challenges, and how we need to really rethink our approach to dealing with some of these things. So we set down those challenges and they make presentations, and okay, not everything is going to work or be practicable, but it's really important to have young people in the conversation because they keep you open, they keep you honest, and they ask questions like, why do you do it that way? And sometimes you can't explain why you do something a particular way. It's just been done that way, and that's why we continue to do it that way. So I think that's really important. Young people are also young, and I don't say it's young people, it's but early career ocean professionals, to use the proper terminology, are very powerful communicators, and they communicate in a way that really takes advantage of the best technology that's available to us. But often, one of the other kind of comments that came through from one of our Canadian colleagues at that meeting was that, bring young people up to the Parliament, and politicians are much more likely to stop and talk to the young person than they are to the slightly older person. Okay, so we need to leverage that. Okay, just from some thoughts. I'm sorry, I'm sort of digging into some specific points there. I do think the collaborative, the breakdown in terms of collaborative approach is really good. And I actually haven't seen that spelled out in a way like you've done it in the document here, from interdisciplinary right through to transdisciplinary, and explaining that, because I think we kind of all throw these terms around, but don't always know exactly what we mean to say them. So I think that's really important, and accepting that they all are relevant and valued, and there's different ways of doing things. So I thought that was really good. So I'm going to sort of conclude with a couple of things. First, one thing that, and it's kind of not really something that you can do much about in terms of NF6, to use I'm already saying NF6, sorry, Navigating the Future 6. Different people will use this document in different ways. There's some people who will read it from cover to cover and use it and actually take pieces of it and put it into the work they're doing. People who are setting funding calls, who are sitting in maybe some of the DGs and the European Commission, they have an in-depth value and use of it. Others might just take a few key things. So I think one of the things, going forward is you put a great slide up at the end of your presentation, Sheila, which was just some of those areas. I think it was about 6 or 7 or 8. And I think in terms of a lot of the people, it's about picking those things and just going for it with those issues. And for me, just reading the document, the long-term programmatic approach, sustained financing for research, new and novel financing instruments for research and monitoring and observation. That's something we need. That's a nut we need to crack. Okay, and we haven't. There's in and of itself a really important agenda. The collaborative piece we've mentioned, ocean observing we've mentioned. One thing that I'm going to finish on 2 things, right? First is the importance of champions in the political sphere. So I'm based in Ireland, and about maybe 14, 15 years ago, we had a government minister, who was an ocean champion, right? He was someone who had grown up by the sea, was a sailor, just loved the ocean, And I mean, the impact that having that individual in a position of authority in terms of the relevant ministry was phenomenal. In the space of a few years he was there, we established a new integrated plan on parts of the ocean well, task groups to actually oversee implementation. There was a new research and innovation strategy. Stuff kept happening. There's a new interdepartmental cross-government mechanism where senior officials would come together and talk to each other, which they weren't doing before. You know, all of these things took place. He moved on to another portfolio, and slowly over time, that momentum went out of that. So we can do our best work, and you're doing your best work, but political champions are just key, and somehow we need to foster those. So that's just it's just a kind of thought on that. And the final thing I'll say is, and again, it's not necessarily the job for this document right now, but I think it's something that's worth reflecting on. One of the things that has naturally and understandably become all pervasive is just, you know, the level of difficulty out there in terms of and anxiety that exists and challenge that exists in relation to climate change, biodiversity loss, you know, all of the things that are happening and we have to respond to. And science is a critical enabler for us to deal with those issues. Okay? But we should never forget or neglect the discovery, right? Which is, you know, the ocean is still an amazing environment. It's still somewhere that young people would, you know, dream about working as a marine scientist. So we need to continue to keep that flame burning. Just making sure we're not forgetting about the sheer kind of wonder and awe of the ocean, you know, and the privilege it is to be involved in ocean science. There's still a lot to discover, despite all the problems and challenges. A lot we still don't know, and let's not forget that as well. But it's just a sort of thought at the close. So just to finish, again, thanks for the opportunity to speak. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been great to read the document. I wish you every luck. I'm looking forward to reading the impact report, because impact is something that I know is really important for Marine Board, and but I wish you every luck in getting it out there. So thanks again.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Niall. Okay, so now I don't know if we have, I'm not really sure how much time we have. Do you have any questions for any of our speakers in the audience or online? I don't know. Gilles, I think maybe if you have a question, you're going to have to come up here to ask it, because I think the other microphone isn't working so well for the people online.
I would like to thank you very much for your comments on the document. I hope it really reach your wishes. I have a question for Niall. I've been involved in the JPI Oceans programming initiative. And I think this is something important, even if, unfortunately, France decided to leave this. As you say, some of the points are common. Do you think that helped also the decision makers of the government research, government representative who were sitting around the JPI Oceans to decide on the actions, or is it useful for you also on that area? And I would like to come to that part, because I think JPI Ocean is something very important before the partnerships. You know, the partnerships, you need to have an agreement at the European with all the mechanisms of 27 countries. And as a JPI Oceans, you can run actions with 3, 4, 5 countries who can put finance and make goals to try to reach at a European level some important actions that we are trying to bring from the science to the policy. So I would like to have your vision, if this is useful for you, and do you think we can continue on that direction?
And
Sure.
you guys are going to just ask a question so you can stand up.
So Gilles, just to clarify, you mean is navigating the future useful to the JPI? Yeah. Absolutely. So I already mentioned in my remarks that we used it already. We used it already in our workshop in June. So it it is being used as one of the key guiding documents for us now in setting our agenda in JPI Oceans for the next 5-6 years. And now that it's published, in fact, what we might do is make sure that, you know, we remind everyone at our meeting next week, where we will have another strategic workshop in Naples, that NF6 is published, and that, you know, it's a good document for people around the table at JPI Oceans, who are very often sitting, as you say, in ministries, or at very least nominated by ministries, to use that in terms of their own national programming, because it's a really important guidance document. This said, JPI Oceans, and thank you for your comments. I mean, JPI Oceans is, you know, I said in my remarks that we were established in 2011. We've been, until very recently, Gilles, you were one of the longest people involved in JPI Oceans, right back to the very beginning. So you know it better than anyone, actually. You've contributed an awful lot over that time. It is a long-term platform. So, you know, well, we talked about a little bit about the problem between short-term initiatives and programmatic, and sorry, you know, project-based funding and this kind of thing. JPI Oceans is a long-term platform. It has a legal entity. It is an AISBL, as Marine Board is. So there is a huge benefit when you have that kind of stability, because you gain the kind of long-term perspective. You have, you know, people around the table that, you know, may be there for several years, and then you have new people coming in, and etc. You build a kind of an armory, for want of a better word, of tools and instruments that you use then. And so joint calls is very big for us, because obviously that's really research calls where countries are putting money on the table, but we also do things like knowledge hubs and various other activities, and knowledge hubs are becoming very important. And again, knowledge hubs are about taking, you know, the science policy advice and the best science, and actually trying to bring that forward into a policy domain, and bringing policymakers. So, for example, we won on blue carbon at the moment, where we have a policy dialogue that's absolutely central part to that. So we have the tools and the instruments to use the kind of outputs from Navigating Future 6 and to bring those into a sort of next stage of implementation, let's say. Yeah.
Maybe you can stay, because I have a question for you. Does anybody else have a question? Or maybe I will go. I'm going to ask my question and then you can ask. Sorry. I'm going to.
No, sorry.
Otherwise, people online can't hear me. So you mentioned the impact report. And actually, I think maybe Delilah also mentioned some of the other things that came out of Navigate the Future 1, 2, 3, 4. And Gilles also mentioned it. And actually, when I looked through, because I only started with 5, I was part of the writing of 5, but when I looked through the previous ones, it's nice to show the things that have come out. But actually, there's quite a few things that we've recommended that has never come out, like sustained observations, for instance. And my question is there one that you can think of previous NF Navigate the Futures, anybody in the audience that's been around? I think of Kat, I think of maybe Gilles, that you think, you know, that was one that if we had cracked that nut 15 years ago, we would be in a much better place. You know, when EMODNet was one of the things that came out of, I think, you know, one or something. It was mentioned there, if I'm not mistaken, and then it was meant to be data and observations, but then it ended up just being data. So when we actually did it together, maybe we can be much further along. So that's one I can think of, and it would be something to think about, if we can go back and think about the other recommendations that came out. Is there anything that you remember? I'm putting you on the spot.
You're absolutely putting me on the spot. The answer is no. It's simply because the main one is the one you mentioned. I mean, and that's why I picked it up in my remarks, because it's one of the things that we have been talking about for years, but it's difficult. It's not an easy thing to achieve. It's you know, data collection by and large is member state competence. It's expensive, and I know, you know, the Commission is working to try and build something. You mentioned in your comments, Delilah, but at the end of the day, no, I mean, it hasn't really gained a kind of level of political support, which has really turned the dial and made it, given us what we would have called a European ocean observing system. So that's probably the biggest one. And I know that I'll think about 10 things now as a journey home, but right now I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
If you have a question, you're going to have to be lucky enough to get up and come to the front. Maybe, sorry, if you can introduce yourself and then ask your question.
Hi, my name is Sheila Heymans. I'm the Managing Director of Core Public Engagement. So very, very interesting. So you can already guess my question. There are several mentions across the report of citizen engagement and citizen science. So I'd be extremely, extremely curious to hear if there are any plans and how you're doing so.
Sorry. Thank you very much for your question. Well, as somebody who spoke earlier, maybe Niall said, or maybe Gilles said, we don't plan on doing anything. We just come up with the crazy ideas and then we give it to the colleagues to do that. I know that there is some citizen science projects in RNI and DTR RNI. And I know that there are citizen science projects more at a national level. I think there is even some through Interreg. So there are citizen science projects out there, but indeed there isn't. I certainly can't think of anything. I don't know if anybody else has any ideas.
Yeah, it's at national level.
Yeah,
and
it's
they use
sorry, Joe.
Yeah, so thank you for your questions. But it was something who came up a couple of years ago, where many scientists, heard about a lot of NGOs, where there was people talking about things without having the science knowledge most of the time. And we wanted to, we discovered that we were missing a link, to bring the scientific knowledge to all the citizens. And then at the national level, many institutes, like my institute, FREMER, decided to try to have a citizen engagement in science and work with us, in going on the beach, taking notes, recognizing things, alerting the scientists when there's some blooms, strange blooms and something like that. And it's working more and more. There is a lot of engagement, and they use a lot with the aquariums, because we have connection with the aquariums, and the aquariums have a lot of people, citizens, and they notice the importance of the sea, of the creature, of the biodiversity, and they try to engage them to work for the science at that level. And so, yes, so the answer is yes, and the more we will be able to do that, and the more we will be able to give the science knowledge, because you cannot say things, like this, because you hear something or on TikTok or something like that, and you say, yeah, the Earth is flat, and I've seen that on my computer, and that's something, it's difficult after to explain and bring back that maybe the Earth is not flat. Fingers is not, but probably sure. Okay, so yes, sorry.
Yeah, indeed, and it's always good to have a moment to reflect on the question. I think citizen science project, by and large, is at a national level or even sub-national level, because in order to engage with citizens, there's always a language barrier. I'm thinking about if you do a citizen science project in Belgium and France and Germany, you already have a language barrier there. So I think it's something that is very much at a national level, and indeed, through JPI Oceans, the nations are aware of what we do, but also we have other local colleagues in the audience who also might pick up on that and know that there are other citizen science projects out there. So I think it's something that is very important, and it is part of that ocean literacy that Gilles mentioned there, that it's very important for us to make sure that citizens understand. Do we have any other? Wow, there we go. Excellent.
Thought of something that's very relevant.
Delilah pointed out that I think the level of the European Commission, DG Environment, the colleagues at DG Environment had a citizen science projects on pollinators, where they asked them to engage and go out and basically map out what kind of pollinators, how much, widespread, what kind of species, etc. I think they also linked, but maybe they had an app indeed, and I think they also linked it to biodiversity aspects. So I'm not sure, but I think they had to map out if it were meadows or the type of habitats basically in which they were counted. That was one of the, I think, few initiatives that we had. But then, and I know that the colleagues of NF were also reflecting on, but I'm not sure if how concrete it already is, on water quality of rivers and lakes. I know that in Germany, the ARD, the public broadcasting company, did an initiative in which they called out to the citizens, but that was indeed, like you said, really in the national language, where they asked the citizens to post pictures of the state of the rivers and the small lakes, including pictures of discharge pipes or things that they saw, and it really gave them an underground knowledge of how the situation looks on the spot, basically, and that is something which I think we could mobilize maybe in the context of the Mission Ocean or in RNI or beach environments activities as well, because citizens are your ears and eyes on the ground. So if you can mobilize them, but it needs to be in a way harmonized through a harmonized template, which is comparable. But of course, as Commission, have the advantage here. We can translate in all the languages. So in that sense, at least you are sure that you have comparable results.
Yeah. Kate and then Anna-Laura. Oh. You have to come here, I'm afraid, because the other one doesn't work online.
I've got the question at the end, so I hope that's okay. So I first wanted to just congratulate the European Marine Board on such a fantastic document. I'm going to give a perspective from the European Marine Observation Data Network, the Marine Data Service of the European Union, MARE. So the recommendations that are coming out of Navigation 6 are going to be really important for internet, because at the moment we are currently developing vision, as you know. These recommendations are going to really inform us from the gaps and priorities from the marine science community perspective, and this is going to help EMODNET service evolution in the sense that we can look at what priorities EMODNET could focus its efforts on first to unlock maybe existing data in these priority areas, because there's a lot of data that's still behind paywalls and behind closed doors of computers. So that's the first thing, and then hopefully we're already working very well, together with yourself, together with Europeans, together with JPI Oceans, and all of the other key actors in Europe to collectively see how we can have this more systematic marine knowledge value chain to really sustain it, and then see how each of our initiatives has a key role really to bring together the needs and requirements of, the observing system, but also flowing through to the end user as well. So we'll take them on board, and we'll welcome your the vision of that. I had a question, I think it was chapter 2, I saw in the recommendations about the innovation labs. I think it was something about new decision-making tools that would be innovative labs. It sounded really interesting, and I wondered if it mentioned scenario building, how that might bring in digital twin ocean, just in case any of you here would like to do it.
Do you want to? I'm going to take over the running of the screen. Paula is going to answer that.
So in the lack of any of our Ocean and People chapter representatives here, I'm Paula Kellett from the European Board Secretariat. The Innovation Lab, as far as I understand the concept, is really where you bring together stakeholders but in a very dynamic setting. So you're actually testing out in a sort of active way what would happen with various decisions, various policies when you apply them. What kind of understandings would we still need to enable that policy to be monitored and developed and implemented? and really what kind of impact that policy would have. So that's why it's quite a dynamic setting. It's not, and I think in that sense, the digital ocean would be a perfect sort of tool to enable those discussions, and because then you would have something concrete to look at, and maybe it would take some disagreements away, might bring some more disagreements, I don't know, but I think the idea is that definitely this sort of dynamic engagement with everybody to really test out different scenarios and how and what would happen, and bringing in different perspectives so you know what the scenarios need to be.
Good. Hi, I'm Hannah Moffat. I work for the regions of West-Brabant, but I also work for the North Sea for the lot of the North Sea regions. It links a little bit with the question about was linked with the question of EMOPED. I found this video quite interesting because we North Sea regions of EMOPED with marine spatial planning in a Greater North Sea Basin Strategy Initiative. So I think it's quite interesting to see how this transdisciplinary, that's a new word for me, the work of really working in a more holistic way. And I think it should be an idea to link up the digital twin of the ocean, make it really practical, try to see what it can bring, link with this marine spatial planning initiatives, and see how it's also, because I'm a region, land sea interactions, how can also those aspects. So I heard the innovative laboratory, so I raise up my hands and use the North Sea for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna-Laura. Indeed, actually, I was at the MSP celebrations yesterday in Marseille, which was very, very nice. And that was one of the things that really came out there as well, that we're really going to have to work closer together. I was in a session on data, and one of the things that if you want to really do MSP, the eDitto is actually going to be super critical, because you have the data from EMOPNet, you have the sort of modeling from Copernicus. That is a minimum requirement, but it's still not enough, because as I said yesterday, you need, in order to plan what's going on in the ocean, you need to know what people are doing. And that's not yet in there. And actually, there is actually 4 projects being funded, that's just being funded from the RGD, to specifically look at the socioeconomic side of that. So really incorporating the socioeconomic modeling, the socioeconomic data that's going to be able to unlock that part of the digital twin oceans to actually make it more useful. So I think it's coming. It's still in the research phase, but at least it's coming, and it's definitely something maybe we should talk about in the office. So yeah, any other questions? Yes.
As a scientist, I worked on a document that was not so expensive as this one, but related to the challenges and perspective on fisheries, aquaculture, and climate change with the Ocean and Climate Platform. And my question is this: how do you make sure, does the EMB make sure that this document has the momentum and the outreach that we want, so that the message are
very good. Yeah. How am I going to have to do this job? That's a very good question. Thank you. It'll be the last question, because I'm going to read it. I think Niall mentioned it and Gilles mentioned it. This is the 6th version of a document. So we have history behind us. People know that if we bring the 10,000 or so scientists of the marine environment around Europe together to try and come up with what the looking forward, what we think is something to think about, it comes with some gravitas that puts some pressure on us to make sure that we write it well. But it also, it is it is important that people are aware of the fact that these are 10,000 marine scientists that have actually agreed to some extent that this is where we need to go. So that's the one side. From our point of view, from the Secretariat point of view, from the Marine Board point of view, we will be sending the document out. We will be asking our members to make sure that it gets to their national representatives so that it's not just in the Brussels bubble. But then we have been talking about it, and Niall mentioned it. I was at the JPI Oceans meeting in June already, prepping them that this is coming. We've been talking about it on social media. We've been talking about it in different formats, and we will be talking about it next year. You will be hearing me at the Ocean Days. You will be hearing me at at all of the events that is coming, because we will be talking about this for 5 years, you know, because it is actually for us the flagship document, and we will be talking about it in many different ways. We also, you will have seen in my slides, we reference other documents because the work we do are often sort of interlinked. So as a secretariat, we try to make sure that we talk about it and we make sure that people know. But sometimes it's still that science policy bubble, and we really need to find different ways of talking about it. The Young Ambassadors is a very good way of making sure that we do that. I mentioned, and Delilah pulled me up on talking about not listening. It's not that the policymakers don't listen. I completely get that you guys are listening and you're always listening, but sometimes we make the effort of trying to get politicians in the room and speaking to them, and then they just don't listen. So, and I think Niall had a good point that maybe you need to find the right politician to listen to, and at least we have one in the room. So that's a good point. So we need to find other ways of speaking to different people in order to make sure that the knowledge gets out there, and that is for us to think about how to do. So thank you. That was a good question to end with. I'm not sure if there's anything online, but I'm going to leave it to Fiona to end.
Thank you so much again to everybody. So it's my job to wrap things up, and just to our stakeholders, we really appreciate your very considered and thoughtful responses to this document. It means a lot, I think, to us and to also the experts who put the time into putting it together. So thanks again to the expert members of the working groups who input to each of these, and the Secretariat for finalising. I should say, in terms of citizen science, the Plastic Pirates is a really important initiative that I think is relevant. And I suppose a lot of the work we do through ComOcean and Ocean Literacy also feeds into that a bit. What I suppose the takeaway is that we really want this report and the messages therein to reach this wide audience. And it's not just down to the Marine Board, we're also asking you to play your parts as well, to develop research and innovation frameworks in support of solution-driven interventions for the sustainable development of our oceans. I just want to note that the European Marine Board presentations and recording of the event will be available online. I'm inviting you all to join the reception and to discuss the main messages from the document. For those of us in the room, we can also access the Immersive Seas and Oceans exhibition here, which won the EU for Ocean Challenge of the Year Award in 2023 and is ending soon. We can take drinks into the section, but no food, sadly. So a small reminder not to take and share images of the art without editing the artists, and information is available on placards. If I could ask speakers and working group members that are here to briefly remain here for the photo. Thank you again for your support and for attending online. So just in terms of the impact, our last question there on the navigation of future six messaging, I suppose whether that be on the recommendation for policy and management or the recommendations for research and monitoring. And both myself and the European Marine Board encourage you all to take decisions and actions to protect the ocean so that it continues to protect us. So thank you all so much again for everything, and good evening.
And